Welcome to 10 Minute Spanish. Today I'd like to talk about the topic of pronunciation and why you should be studying it on your own outside of whatever foreign language course you're taking. Pronunciation is without a doubt the most neglected, overlooked, and poorly taught foreign language skill. If you major in Spanish at some university in the United States, you'll most likely graduate without taking a single class having anything to do with pronunciation. If you do take a class on phonetics, it's almost certain that the curriculum will be theory-based rather than practical. In other words, you'll learn the phonetic alphabet, and the instructor will teach you which symbols go with which Spanish sounds, and that sort of thing. But you won't be presented with anything that diagnoses your personal weaknesses, or does much of anything to directly improve your pronunciation. Imagine for a moment that university guitar performance programs work the same way. Imagine, for example, that there was no practical instruction in guitar technique, that guitar performance students were expected to pick up hand placement, fingering, posture, picking and strumming, and all the other fundamentals on their own. Imagine that essentially all guitar instruction was given in a classroom setting, and tests were primarily written. Of course, in this hypothetical program, students would still be expected to own a guitar and play it on their own time, and they would be encouraged to join musical groups and that sort of thing. But they wouldn't receive any practical one-on-one instruction with a master guitarist, and they wouldn't take any classes where they were graded on the details of their guitar technique. In fact, since professors in this hypothetical theory-based program would have graduated from similar theory-based programs themselves, none of them would be expected to be masters of guitar technique anyway. Upon graduation with their 4-year guitar performance major, how well would these students actually play the guitar? Well, there would be a wide range of outcomes, wouldn't there? Although it wasn't required, some students would practice daily, take private lessons from masters, spend summers in special programs, and that sort of thing. They'd end up being world-class musicians, even though the program didn't require it. On the other hand, others would be absolutely terrible. While they'd know far more than the average person about guitar history and theory, and they'd be able to talk about guitar technique, they might be no better than a novice at actually making a guitar produce music. And the majority of students in this hypothetical program would be no better than mediocre. They'd surely be able to pick up a guitar and play some songs, but with no one teaching guitar technique, they'd never be better than an amateur guitarist, even after years of study. Gratefully, this is not the situation with university guitar performance programs, which generally have a heavy emphasis on practical guitar technique, in addition to music theory, and regularly produce master musicians. However, this is exactly the situation with university foreign language programs. I've met people who majored in Spanish who came away speaking the language with truly admirable proficiency. And I've met people who graduated from exactly the same program who literally couldn't participate in an average conversation. No exaggeration. And of course, a very large majority of foreign language majors develop basic proficiency, the ability to actively participate in conversations on a variety of topics, but always speak with significant grammatical inaccuracy and a heavy foreign accent. Why this difference between the proficiency of music performance majors and foreign language majors? Well, it's what I mentioned at the beginning. It's the difference in teaching methodology between music performance and foreign language. Okay, but why are these two things taught so differently? I think the biggest reason is the goals of the students. Musicians expect to play their instruments in very public settings, and they want to do it masterfully and artfully. Nobody wants to give a music recital and perform like a clumsy child. They positively insist that their music education be challenging, and that their instructors nitpick their technique until they get it right. Most foreign language students, on the other hand, regard speaking their foreign language not as a performance, but as a practical exercise, in which their goal is communication. They tolerate imperfections in their delivery as long as they understand and can make themselves understood, and they don't want anyone pointing out their mistakes. An implicit assumption of foreign language programs is that students will just pick up pronunciation over time as they're exposed to it. Even if we assume that Spanish teachers accurately model native-like pronunciation, which they generally don't unless they're native speakers themselves, there's a phenomenon called native language interference that prevents us from accurately perceiving many important details of the pronunciation of a foreign language. What happens is that when you hear people speaking in a foreign language, you filter what you hear through your internalized phonology of your native language. Think about the consequences of this for a minute. If your observations of native pronunciation are distorted and inaccurate, how can you rely on those observations to improve your pronunciation? I witnessed this phenomenon firsthand when I was a graduate student living in the Dominican Republic. One thing I did to earn a little extra cash was tutor American university students who were studying abroad there. One semester, several of them had me tutor them as a group for their Spanish phonetics class. During our first session, I explained to them how a particular sound was pronounced. All of them were in agreement that I was mistaken, and they argued with me quite forcefully. I could tell that several of them thought that I was the wrong person to tutor them, and I didn't expect them to return. To my surprise, they all came back for the following session, and they sheepishly admitted that once I had made them aware of that particular pronunciation, they heard it everywhere they went. And they commented on how strange it was that although they had been immersed in Spanish for months or even years, they had never noticed that pronunciation before, to the point that they were certain I was wrong when I pointed it out to them. The point of the story is this. Your internalized phonology of your native language prevents you from making accurate observations about the pronunciation of your foreign language, and most people need for someone to explain in detail how the sounds of their foreign language are different from the sounds of their native language in order for them to even hear many of those differences. On a personal level, most intermediate and advanced foreign language students suffer from the problem of overestimating how well they speak their foreign language, sometimes by orders of magnitude. For example, once people develop conversational proficiency, say after a semester of study abroad, they begin to consider themselves fluent and may feel that their language skills compare favorably with native language. Many of them tell stories about dreaming in Spanish and being told by natives that they speak perfect Spanish. Yet as just one measure of proficiency, good research demonstrates that non-native speakers who've studied, worked, and lived for many years in a foreign country still have a vocabulary tens of thousands of words smaller than that of a native. The average vocabulary size for non-native speakers who live full-time in a foreign country is smaller than the vocabulary of a native 4-year-old. Someone who majored in Spanish at an American university would have a vocabulary smaller still, even if they did some study abroad. While I don't have solid figures regarding students' pronunciation and grammatical accuracy, we can assume that they compare similarly. People are simply nowhere near as fluent in their foreign language as they think they are. And this dramatic disparity between perception and reality prevents students from even realizing just how much improvement is left for them to make. In comparing pronunciation with music performance technique, we've essentially made the argument that there's an aesthetic reason for improving your pronunciation. Your speech will sound better if you do. That's it. That's the aesthetic reason. Do you want your speech to sound better, more authentic, prettier? Then study and practice pronunciation. But is there also a practical reason? Well, yes. Good research indicates that bad pronunciation is a bigger barrier to communication than either inaccurate grammar or errors in vocabulary and word choice. So even if your primary objective is simple communication, there is still good reason to study and improve your pronunciation. And other studies found that formal instruction in accent reduction significantly improved students' foreign language pronunciation. So the idea that foreign language pronunciation can't really be taught, that it's something some people are just born with, isn't really true. From the practical standpoint, those are really the only justifications a student should need. It's important, and you can improve it. All right, if you've made it this far, you're probably a different sort of language learner, and you're interested in developing good pronunciation. So what can you as a Spanish student do to improve your own pronunciation? Here are a few suggestions. Find good materials and study pronunciation. Overcome your native language interference by consciously studying the difference between the sounds of your native language and your foreign language. There are materials available if you look for them. A major purpose of this YouTube channel will be teaching beginner, intermediate, and advanced pronunciation. I have a playlist of videos I made years ago on all the basics of Spanish pronunciation that you can find in my playlists, and I will continue to put out new pronunciation videos as this channel grows. If you have any requests for videos on specific topics, please ask in the comment section of any of my videos. Cultivate a different attitude about language. Don't just think of it as communication, but as performance too. Think of yourself as a musician, and your foreign language is your music. Or alternatively, think of yourself as an actor on a stage, and your foreign language is the character you're playing. Adopt the attitude that when you're speaking, you're not just communicating information, but performing. And you want your performance to be as perfect as possible. Cultivate genuine humility about your skill level. Understand that even as you develop proficiency, you don't speak anywhere near perfectly, and there's always a lot more to learn. As you improve, your teachers and native speakers will compliment you on how well you speak. And while you should always be proud of yourself for your accomplishments, wise students don't let the praise go to their head and make them too arrogant to continue improving. Don't ever stop improving. It doesn't matter how long you've been speaking your foreign language, you can make changes if you want. As an example, I know someone who speaks absolutely outstanding Spanish who became aware that he was mispronouncing a particular sound combination. He could have said, "I've been speaking Spanish for years. It's too late for me to change my accent now." Or, "I'm already better than most people, it's not that big of a deal." Or even, "It's rude to point out people's mistakes. Rather than correcting this one, I'm just going to be angry at people for noticing." No, instead he studied it, thought about it, and worked hard on it for several months until he improved it. Now he pronounces that sound essentially perfectly, and he can add it to a long list of sounds that he pronounces essentially perfectly. It's because of this attitude and approach that he speaks Spanish with a near-native accent. All right, this has been a collection of some of my thoughts on pronunciation. Honestly, this is just a fraction of the thoughts I have on this subject. I could easily talk about it for an hour, but I think this is a good stopping point. I genuinely hope that you find some of these ideas motivational, and you use that motivation to drive your personal improvement. Again, if you have any questions on any topic related to the Spanish language, please ask in the comments. I'd be happy to consider making a special video just for you.